Is there anything you would have done differently?
We reported a true story.
Our colleague Brian Williams is back in Kuwait City tonight after a close call in the skies over Iraq.
Controversial Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh and questions about Kavanaugh's drinking in the past.
Sean Hannity, come on up, Sean Hannity.
Today, Andrew Cuomo is having a moment.
Hi, I am Chris Steyerwalt.
And I'm Eliana Johnson.
It's a fact. Welcome to Ink-Stained Wretches, where we break down what's going wrong and what's going right with the American news media. Eliana Johnson, I'm reaching out to you as a friend. I'm in a little bit of a time of crisis because I just got back from New York we're recording this a day early on a Wednesday, and I just got back from New York where I did very special coverage of Super Tuesday.
It was not so super.
The Drooper Tuesday. And as I was getting ready to leave yesterday for this very quick, very tiring trip, all of my neckties cascaded to the floor. Now, you can't understand the trauma that this represents. I'm sure there's a equivalent female, but imagine if like your rack of nicest dresses all cascaded to the floor, and I just had to leave them there. So when I got back this afternoon, I had to go through and do some triage. Some ties are being pressed in between books right now. I don't know what it's all gonna. I don't know where it all goes, but I'm going through it right now.
Can't believe you're still standing, Chris, after such a trial.
I'm shook. I'm shook.
But hold on, you barreled past the debut of your Sunday show.
We did it,
which I want to ask you about. Yes, congratulations.
We did do it. And
so tell us about the debut and what, if anything, surprised you hosting your inaugural Sunday show? Sundays at, remind us,
10 a.m. on News Nation.
10 a.m. on
That's
News
right.
Nation.
Well, I'm very excited about this week's show, particularly because of the excellent panel that we're going to have. Do you know who's going to be on the panel, Eliana?
I have no idea.
Oh, I have an idea. I heard that it's you. I heard that you are going to be on the panel this Sunday.
I have yet to receive an invite.
Oh my gosh. Well, I've been led astray. I've been told that it was a cert that you would be on our
I'll be there.
Fantastic panel of journalists. You better.
I'll be there.
We need you. I'll get you a donut. If you come, I'll give you a donut.
Okay.
But the best part, the nice part about it was what I thought it would be, which is doing that journalist panel. Like, we got through, I had Nikki Haley on the show. I had Ron Johnson on the show, talked to Ken Buck, talked to Jim Himes. So we had a bunch of lawmakers and interviewed them. But the best part, my favorite part, was, of course, getting to talk to a roundtable of journalists, because I hate talking points and I hate spin. And it's not immoral for people to go on television and flack for their party or their candidate. That's fine. It's part of the process. But you don't really get debate and you don't really get analysis from people who are paid to do to advance one party or candidate. So it was really good. We had the great David Drucker. We had Bob Cusack from The Hill. We had Swerdlick from the New York Times. He was great. I'd never met him before. He was excellent. And Wretches' favorite fill-in host, Christine Rosen. And it was a very lovely conversation, very good. And we got away with it. I'm happy, and I'm looking forward to this weekend, especially since we'll have the Wretch Effect on television.
Don't you think there should be one of these panels where we have mimosas and like donuts on the set?
Just get a little loose. Just loosen it up. What if we did it so that I'm cooking breakfast and folks are just there and you can
on the Today Show.
Yeah, you can pour them mimosas and I'll make omelets or whatever and fry up a little bacon and we'll just talk. It'll be real homey.
I like it.
I like it.
All right. On the front page. Chris, as you mentioned, we are recording the day after Super Tuesday, and there have been big developments in the presidential race on both sides. First, Nikki Haley has dropped out of the race, as he's known to Cousin Dean in my family, but Dean Phillips on the Democratic side. I was aggrieved by Politico's alert that flashed on my phone over the weekend when Nikki Haley won the DC primary, and that preceded Super Tuesday. And the way Politico covered it was Nikki Haley won her first presidential primary on Sunday. She just had to wait for the Washington, D.C. insider crowd to vote. Read the latest.
Oh.
So snide and snarky.
When I interviewed her, the first question I asked her was, "Are you sick of people asking you when you're going to drop out?" And I have to say, look, there's got to be a balance between horse race coverage and issue coverage, but we miss the balance pretty wide in covering elections. Whether it's Dean Phillips or whether it's Nikki Haley or whether it's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or whomever, Marianne Williamson, they're running because they're running and they've got their reasons, and just let them run, right? They're going to run till they don't, and you can analyze the race, but there's a sneeringness about it that I dislike.
From the Washington, D.C. insiders, sneering at the fact that her base was more educated and wealthier than Donald Trump's base. I mean, give me a break.
Yes, from a little rich coming from Politico,
give me a break,
as it were.
Well, the presidential primaries were probably the least interesting of the primaries that took place that night. There were congressional primaries and gubernatorial primaries all over the country as well last night. And you would flag this story from Politico. The most important governor's race of 2024 is about to have its own version of Trump.
Yes, this is a trope that will seemingly never die. So it's the story of the guy who is now the Republican nominee for governor in North Kakalaki, and his name is Mark Robinson. And it says that Trump paved the way for him and that he's like Trump because of what he thinks, or what's the line? Robinson is a bombastic and engaging orator who has often drawn comparisons to Trump for their rapid rise in politics, the devotion they command from the GOP base, and the laundry list of scandals that have trailed both men. Now, it is fair to say that Robinson is kind of a Trump impersonator, right? He dresses like Trump. He wears the hat. He is very much doing a Trump imitation in his performance. But that is about as far as it goes. The scandals that pursue Robinson are about gross stuff he said about the Holocaust and other really. Robinson is one of these people who, when you read what they say he said, you think, well, it can't be that. And then you're like, oh, wow, okay. So he is I guess I'll put it this way. Herschel Walker or Mehmet Oz or Doug Mastriano or Carrie Lake, or we could go down a list of candidates that Trump has backed and won nominations for. So it's certainly reasonable to talk about the ways in which Trump has shaped his party and now dominates it completely. That is certainly true. But the idea that Mark Robinson is a new creature or that he is just like Trump, he's not. Trump, it's connected to Trump, right? And it's connected to the rise of the populist culture war faction of the Republican Party. But this is a lazy way to do it.
Beyond that, this trope or theme, if we see a lot of candidates that are just like Trump, isn't that to be completely expected? The guy has been the party's presidential nominee now 3 times.
Yes.
And controls the Republican Party. Would we not expect to see candidates running in his mold up and down the ballot?
Yes. And just as I'm sure, and I don't want to be unfair, but I'm sure that, because I'm sure people wrote pieces that talked about how Republicans were imitating George W. Bush. And I know that's true because they all got those little Texas belts with the silver tips at the end, and they all started wearing cowboy boots. Ron DeSantis still in the grip of the George W. Bush fashion movement. And, you could talk about Tom DeLay. So that's a thing. And certainly people wrote pieces about how politicians were the next Obama. How many next Obamas were there between 2008 and 2016, 2020? We've had a lot of next Obamas.
Well, I think it's different.
Okay.
They're not saying this guy's the next Trump.
Right.
they're trying, they're saying the obvious, which is that they're all imitators.
Yes. And now
Carrie Lake and this guy, they're not saying he's coming to displace Trump or trying to be the next Trump. It's that he has little minions, which they think is an incredibly damning thing to say rather than completely obvious and to be expected.
yes, that is true. And so yes, a stupid way to do it. I flagged this next piece. It's a interesting journalism ethics discussion about you may know more about this than I do, but this is the story of a man named Brady. No, this is the story headline. This is an AP piece. Writer for conservative media outlet surrenders to face Capitol riot charges. And this is the story of a guy who works for Glenn Beck's Blaze News. Does Glenn Beck still own Blaze News?
I'm not sure. And I was going to say, when I read the headline of this story, I clicked in to see, ooh, what conservative media outlet? And was like, oh, it's like, isn't a real thing.
So Blaze News, which was Glenn Beck's thing that he started after he got canned at Fox. But so there's this guy who was he's charged with, let me see, 4 misdemeanor counts, including trespassing and disorderly conduct charges. After the riot erupted, this is what the AP says, Baker entered the Capitol through a broken door and joined the mob at the barricaded doors to the House chamber. According to an FBI agent's affidavit, Shipley provided, who's Shipley? I'm sorry.
Shipley's the attorney.
Okay, his attorney. Yes, sorry. Yeah. Shipley provided the Associated Press with a copy of the affidavit, which wasn't immediately unsealed. In another part of the Capitol, the affidavit says Baker antagonized police officers who tried to keep him on the other side of a door jam, repeatedly asking, "Are you going to use that gun on us?" He remained inside the building for approximately 37 minutes before police let him out of the Capitol, according to the FBI. So one part of this is an interesting journalism story about how this is being covered and his claims that he was there as a journalist, right? That what he was doing, that he should be protected because he's a journalist. The other part is, this is the 2024 part.
And can I just add what's analogous to this is the thing that came to my mind was the accusations of the New York Times and Associated Press stringers who were on the scene, at 5 a.m. as Hamas rushed into Gaza.
Oh, I didn't think about that.
Photographed.
I did not think
these
about
guys.
That.
And so those outlets are grappling with accusations that they employ terrorists, because how the hell would these guys have been on the scene of the crime? Now, this is a much more mild example of them when there was plenty of time as the Capitol riot unfolded. This guy wasn't like the first person in the Capitol. There's none of that accusation. The question here is, was he a witness or a participant? For those guys, the question is, how did they know to be there?
Yeah.
To photograph the guys crossing the fence into Israel in early morning hours. But the questions that arise are the same, which is, was he a journalist or was he a participant?
Yes. And I want to explore that question more, but the fight over January 6th, this is just a reminder that the relitigation of January 6th and the discussion of January 6th, as the Carpenter sang, we've only just begun. And I noted when Trump was giving his victory speech on Super Tuesday, he started and he was walking right up to, he says, and then a terrible thing happened. And he restrained himself from saying they stole the election. And I will credit Trump and his handlers. They have not talked about that much lately. Sometimes on True Social, it splurps out. But Joe Biden's campaign is making no bones about the fact that January 6th, the images of January 6th, the story of January 6th is going to be right at the heart of their effort to make this a choice election between Biden and Trump and not a referendum election on Biden. So brace yourselves, America. We are definitely going back there.
Chris, up next, let's talk a little bit about Israel, Hamas, and this excellent article in the Atlantic by Graham Wood, who writes about the case of the military official who lit himself on fire in front of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C., while yelling "Free Palestine," and the left-wing the members of the left wing of the Democratic Party who have rushed to glorify this guy. His name was Aaron Bushell or Bushnell, and he's trending on TikTok and Instagram and all over social media. And Graham Wood writes, does anyone think determination and sincerity are the missing ingredients in the current war? In this conflict, these qualities are cheap and everyone knows it. I wonder if I'm the only one left who would be more moved and persuaded by an absence of fanaticism. And he concludes, social media posts attributed to the DC self-immolator suggest that he thought Israelis were fair game for violence, one and all, and that fanaticism was his default setting. And how, well, there are some righteous causes that people have lit themselves on fire for. He goes through the historical record and notes that there are lots of noxious causes for which people have done this. My takeaway was a little bit different, which I viewed this as of a piece of the entrance of and glorification of, justification of political violence more broadly into American culture, where we've seen it play out apropos the Israel-Hamas conflict all over college campuses. And this too, it's violence to oneself, but is political violence, and that we should never cheer it.
Yes, and the taking mentally ill people seriously is a mistake, right? When I heard the sad story of this man lighting himself on fire, I thought, well, it must be a very deeply troubled person, because the world is full of suffering all the time. And that if this has so captured, if the suffering of people in one part of the world has so captured his imagination that he is trying to kill himself by lighting himself on fire, then, this is a troubled soul. And he was. And so there's the excellent point raised in this article. And I knew 25 years ago in local news, you don't cover suicide, right? It encourages it, right? It's a sad story, and you may cover the death. And if the death causes a traffic jam or a problem or something, you may have to report on that, but you're going to do it discreetly. You're not going to banner it across the front page, morose jumper snarls traffic on bridge with suicide. You're not going to do that. You're going to be discreet. You're going to record it, and you're going to move on. And I thought this was a particularly ghoulish and awful, and it just engaging with the political ideas and philosophical ideas of mentally ill people is a mistake for a lot of reasons.
Up next, Chris, you had flagged this piece from the Dispatch
Oh,
by our friend Jonah Goldberg, the many problems with accusing Israel of genocide in Gaza. And Jonah writes, all of this is worth noting, and not just to demonstrate the pretextual nature of the accusation and highlight the double standard applied to Israel at the UN and elsewhere. In recent years, American journalists have anguished over the problems of disinformation in general and Russian disinformation in particular. There was a related, robust debate over whether journalists should call Trump's lies lies. But on any given day, politicians, pundits, and activists routinely accuse Israel of genocide, even massive genocide, with little to no pushback from the press. In fact, the opposite is more common. The press often leaps at allegations, often initially made by Hamas, that seem to confirm the genocide charge, only to have to later retract once the facts emerge.
I'm not surprised, because I often get to say it, that Jonah wrote something that had been on my mind. And this piece, to be very lame, language matters, words matter, what we say matters, and in journalism particularly. And the word genocide is getting thrown around like crazy, right? And every war is not a genocide, right? Some wars are just, some wars are unjust. Some conflicts are unavoidable. Some are conflicts of choice. There are many, many considerations around it, but not every conflict is a genocide. And of course, it cheapens genocide. We have the maximum case of genocide in history of the Holocaust. It was systematic, it was intentional, and it targeted one ethnic group, one subgroup, as well as some other folks. But it was that systematic effort to eliminate a group, and that's a genocide. And there are other instances in history where we can say that's a genocide, but that's not a genocide. So, for example, Mao's Great Leap Forward killed a lot of people. The greatest one, maybe the largest mass murder in history. Wasn't a genocide. It was just mass murder. And being able to talk about these things and understand these things in a sensible way. And that's why, of course, the video of protesters chasing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out of a movie theater, demanding that she just say the word, just say that it's a genocide. Why won't you say it's a genocide? Brilliantly, unintentionally, it just brilliantly encapsulated the stupidity of this discussion.
Can I just add to that this is pure gaslighting in that one party in this conflict has explicitly and undeniably genocidal aims set down in writing, and that is Hamas. Their attack on Israel on October 7th was an attempt to wipe Israel off the map. Their stated goal is not even about Israel. It is about Jews everywhere. And to refer to Hamas as a genocidal organization is accurate. And yet, the thing we hear about much more often in the mainstream media is that Israel is perpetrating a genocide when its aims are self-defense, and that Jewish people in Israel and others, the Arab population of Israel, can live in safety and security and not fall victim again to a massacre in the same way that happened on October 7th.
The release of the UN report that identified the sex crimes, the systematic rape of women in the original attack and subsequently put a pretty fine point on the discussion, right? The idea of how to deal with an adversary like that, whatever anybody thinks about the way the war has been conducted by the Israelis, that puts it in pretty stark relief about what kind of conflict this is and what's going on. And it defies the sort of, and we talked about it before, about the idea of trying to, and the calling Israel's war on Hamas a genocide is another, just a part of trying to use, we'll call them grad school tropes about history and civilization in sloppy, lazy ways, which, well, it's a colonial settler state. And so this is racism because these people are lighter complected than those. And it's just, it's dumb. And it should be each of history should instruct us. And we can think about, I've spent an unusual amount of time thinking about the consequences of the fall of the Ottoman Empire in the past couple of weeks. That's me. That's how I get down. But thinking about this in a broader, more meaningful way than just identifying who is the white colonial settler and therefore the genocidal agent is pretty stupid. And I will add one note of politics in this, which is all of the people who are chasing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in their mind, figuratively or literally, demanding that they denounce Israel more strenuously, and the protest votes against Joe Biden that came in Ilhan Omar's district on Tuesday in Minnesota. I loved for them that in Donald Trump's victory speech, he said, finish the job. Israel's going to finish the job. Got to get in there. And I thought, yes, that's right. That's right, dummies. Guess what's about to happen? Your protest vote against Joe Biden, you will now be left between a guy who is equivocating with a guy who's like, bomb him back to the Stone Age. Take him out.
And you know what is never covered, by the way, is the role of the Palestinians' Arab neighbors in Egypt, in Lebanon, and elsewhere.
Well, don't spoil my favorite. We have a great piece on that. It is really good.
In perpetuating Palestinian suffering, because they, along with Hamas, have a vested interest in capitalizing on the propaganda of using Palestinian suffering as propaganda against Israel.
And
Not taking this is the only war without refugees. Okay, they are not letting Palestinians seek refuge in their countries.
And avoiding the uprising, trying to simultaneously avoid uprisings in their own populations by trying to move against Hamas or make changes there. So they're they're trying to just make like a hole in the water.
Exactly. Chris, that brings us to our business section.
Oh, yes.
Where
Roll
we
the
have,
ticker tape.
Where we have a piece from the American Enterprise Institute.
Those guys, they're great.
On OpenAI striking back in its lawsuit, the New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI over copyright.
So this is a story that we've been tracking for quite a while, because this New York Times lawsuit against OpenAI will be one of the things that frames how we proceed as it relates to copyright and all of this stuff. And
how OpenAI impacts the future of the news business.
Totally.
Whether it can use news copy to generate AI without paying for it.
So this is from my colleague Michael Rosen, and it's just, I include it because it's good to bring us up to date on this, and how OpenAI argued that the fair use doctrine authorizes it, quote, to publicly accessible content to train generative AI models to learn about language, grammar, and syntax, and to understand the facts that constitute humans' collective knowledge. Far from lacking a transformative potential, the company contended ChatGPT is employing copyrighted content as part of a technological process that, as here, results in the creation of new, different, and innovative products. So this is one of the central debates that will define our industry for the coming decades, and it's good to stay on top of.
Chris, this is kind of sort of a business story, but I just thought it was a fascinating read. Really could have been my obsession. And this was about a lawsuit against The Atlantic filed in Japanese court that The Atlantic settled years after it was filed, about a piece in 2017 by Molly Ball, who's a prominent journalist now at the Wall Street Journal, but was then at The Atlantic, about a Cambodian newspaper and its founder. And the founder of that newspaper died, but there were several claims that Molly Ball made about him in this Atlantic piece, including that when she got cancer as a young reporter, he didn't lift a hand to help make sure that insurance helped to cover her treatment. And his daughter filed this lawsuit, a defamation lawsuit in Japanese court. And I didn't know this, but apparently in American court, the defamation claims, you can't pursue a defamation claim after the plaintiff.
You cannot libel the dead.
Yes, exactly. But in Japan, that is not the case. And so his daughter, named Deborah Krisher Steele, pursued this case to the ends of the earth and, in fact, recovered an old laptop that this guy had used years and years ago and found emails that showed him, among other things, corresponding with her and saying, I'm going to do what I can to help solve this insurance issue, showing that it had been resolved. And ultimately, and this is a long and fascinating story, The Atlantic was forced to settle with her. And this piece is by Eric Wemple in the Washington Post. And he writes, the collective payoff from 6 years worth of pushback now lies at the foot of the story. And it reads as follows. This article originally stated that Bernie Krisher failed to assist the author with a health insurance problem in 2003 when he was her employer. The article noted that Krisher denied this, saying he had appealed to the insurance company without success. After the article went to press, Krisher located emails from that time showing that he had attempted to help the author, but that the problem had by that time been resolved. And it goes on and on and on, noting several factual errors in this piece, and quotes Bernie Krisher's daughter, Deborah Krisher Steele. She says, I did their job. I did their fact-checking job. And she spent 2 decades helping to manage the Krisher family's philanthropic projects and ultimately helping pursue her father's vendetta. So fascinating piece showing how The Atlantic did not really fact-check these small claims and defamatory claims ultimately made in this story.
Well, it in no way diminishes my fandom of Molly Ball.
Up next, Chris, our
Yes.
facile file.
Oh, baby. Oh, we got some primo stuff, folks. Oh, I know that you saw this story. I know you saw the zombie CVS story. Did you not?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So I'm a Washington resident. You're a former Washington resident. So it's like generative AI was asked to write the perfect facile Washington Post story. The Zombie CVS, a late capitalism horror story, how one Washington, D.C. drugstore got spun by the culture wars into a symbol for America's shoplifting panic. She begins, there is almost nothing left to steal at the CVS in Columbia Heights, and that gives you an idea of which items have actual value. She goes on, what's not been stolen, on and on and on, and gets to this point. America is a sticky-fingered nation built on stolen land, and its current moral panic is about shoplifting. It's not just a worry in Columbia Heights. All over the country, from sea to shining CVS, there are concerns about petty theft, which some retailers claim, some, is worse than ever before. Videos of brazen thefts have gone viral. It has become a political talking point and a political liability. Before I condemn this piece, I want to say, I think I know what the author was trying to do. And I think I think it's also true that there could have been an interesting piece written about how one CVS became a political football, because the thing that she's pointing out is true. Fox News and it became a symbol, right? That the CVS became a symbol, and it's obvious all stories are more complicated than that. And it would have been an interesting and good story. But the fact that it was turned into late capitalism, that this is how late capitalism goes, was so preposterous and such a bizarre turn away from covering the story and into, I'll put it this way, she did exactly what she's accusing the people she's criticizing of doing, right? So instead of writing what could have been an interesting media story or could have been an interesting story about the CVS or all that stuff, she decided that she would use the coverage as a political cudgel of her own. There is nothing early, late, or mid-capitalistic about allowing shoplifting. There isn't. And the fact that DC has struggled with crime at a greater degree, serious and less serious, than comparable cities is true. It's just true. It's just a fact. DC has a crime problem, and that's not made up. It's not conjecture. And it's certainly true that corporations' decision to allow shoplifting or not to prosecute or try to disrupt shoplifters it's part of the story. But trying to turn this into a commentary on capitalism was a hack move.
And what about this one? We have long COVID could be the reason for your bad hangovers, research. And I read this with deep interest to see whether, in fact, my hangovers are a result of long COVID.
Do you think that's what it is?
And then I got to the examples. A man in his 60s reportedly used to consume alcohol with no problem, but now he can't have one beer without feeling the aftermath. Long COVID left him suffering from headaches, cognitive impairment, and sleep disturbances for 5 months, according to the study. The patient experienced chronic daily headaches characterized by a squeezing sensation at the top of the back and the head, researchers wrote. And there was another wonderful example of the woman who felt that she had alcohol poisoning. I want to read it word for word. Another woman who had COVID symptoms for 3 months allegedly can no longer even handle one cocktail and ends up with what she describes as, quote, alcohol poisoning with a terrible 3-day headache. I'm not sure I would describe those as hangovers.
Right. I flag this story as, and I don't know enough about long COVID to talk about.
Nobody does.
Yeah, I don't pretend to know. So I have no commentary on long COVID. But this definitely falls into my bugaboo about study says, research says. Study says, research says. And another reason people get real bad hangovers in their 60s? Because they're old. That's true, right? If you can't drink like you used to, it might not be long COVID. It might be that you're old. You might be old.
Unfortunately, I think at 39, that is my affliction.
You can't soar with the eagles in the morning if you hoot with the owls at night.
This is our misleading headline of the day.
the piece,
a-
the facile piece de resistance.
Our misleading headline of the day is in Politico. The headline is "The Right Way to Cover the Intersection of Religion and Politics." And oh, interesting, I thought, only to find that it was a muted mea culpa by Heidi Prisbilla, who had to come with her tail between her legs after she said that people who believe in God-given rights are Christian nationalists. And she had also been behind a piece that described House Speaker Mike Johnson as a Christian nationalist because he believes America is a city on a hill and a special place, and people are endowed by their creator with unalienable rights.
Regular wretches will know. Tim Carney and I talked about this at length last week, and this is Heidi Prisbilla coming back with her mea culpa-ish, medium culpa.
But the best part is that she's coming back to instruct us on how actually to cover this. She's the authority, and noting that due to some clumsy words, I was interpreted by some people as making arguments that are quite different from what I believe. I mean, I don't know how they could ever have come to that conclusion. The confusion from my words was compounded when they were wrested from the full context of my appearance. Excerpts of what I said were promoted widely in some political circles by some activists whose primary objection, I feel sure, was not my television appearance, but my coverage in Politico about the tactics and agenda of political activists who subscribe to a philosophy they call Christian nationalism. I don't know, Chris, I'm not getting like a real apologetic feel here.
She says the Declaration of Independence, of course, held that rights are not granted by the government, but that all people, quote, are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution was drafted to give legal expression to the ideal of self-government and the inherent rights of all citizens. Separation of church and state is embodied in the Constitution. Not exactly, but yes, okay, I know what you mean. And there is no single religion endorsed by the government. Yes, that it does say that. The first lines of the preamble of the Constitution, "We the people," indicate that our government derives its legitimacy from the consent of the governed. That's true. She did, except for the little fill-up about separation of church and state versus establishment. It's the establishment clause in the First Amendment. But this is not only true and an accurate recitation, it is that I'd take it one step farther. The Declaration of Independence, the declaration that we have natural rights that adhere to us at birth, right? That statement, which was pretty radical then as it is now, right? That we are born with these rights and they are attached to us is a radical, if you will, a revolutionary concept. The purpose of the Constitution is to defend those rights. Is to create a government that exists to preserve and protect those rights. The Constitution exists to protect the Declaration. The Declaration is the spark, and the Constitution is the furnace in which it can burn, the fire of liberty can burn. And
can we just
absolutely, and absolutely it is true. And then I will shut up, I promise. Absolutely, it is true that the government, we the people, the government derives its legitimacy not from God, but from the governed. It is the consent of the governed from which it derives its legitimacy. What she said and what she wrote, it's not just what she said on television. She did not understand that. I don't believe that, maybe she did, but I don't believe she understood that. And I think that she's putting this in here as like, well, of course, but I don't think that she adequately wrestled with that idea at all.
And this is the full quote that she said was wrenched out of context by activists. The thing that unites them as Christian nationalists is that they believe our rights as Americans and as all human beings do not come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress, from the Supreme Court. They come from God. Can we move on now?
I'm good. I mean,
wrenched out of context.
The problem here is
in context there, that makes perfect sense. So, this was bad faith actors twisting her words.
What she was doing, the false argument that she's having here is the legitimate criticism of her work was that she was lumping normal people who believe in the paragraph mostly that who could mostly agree with the paragraph that I read, in with Christian nationalists. And they're different things, right? So you can't say Robbie George is a Christian nationalist, right? You can't say Yuval Levin is a Jewish nationalist. That's not right. And her error was a category error. And she does not, speaking of not wrestling with it, that's what she didn't wrestle with. The legitimate complaint about her work was that she was impugning the people who have mainstream normal views and just sweeping them into Christian nationalism. She writes a defense that basically says, they say there's no Christian nationalism, but there is. Well, yeah, of course there is. And it's weird and dangerous, but that doesn't mean that everybody who believes in natural rights or God-given rights is a Christian nationalist. Harumph.
This belies something that's really common in the mainstream media, which is because they are not of the right and they don't spend time talking to people on the right, they have no idea they think everyone on the right is the same and shares the same views. And they have no idea about the deep philosophical debates that are percolating on the right, including this one. And that people like you and me share deep philosophical disagreements with people like Patrick Deneen and Adrian Vermeule, who are keen to use the courts and the government to push us toward a more Catholic society.
Yes.
More Catholic vision of society. But and this is just one example, they have no idea that there are deep disagreements about economics or on foreign policy on the right. They view us as a monolith.
And what Tim and I were talking about was, if you knew just one, and Tim, I use Tim as the example. Tim grew up in New York. He lived for a long time in suburban DC, Maryland. His friends, he has tons of progressive friends and neighbors. And his point was, conservative journalists have the advantage that the world that they live in is full of progressives and left of center people. So it doesn't take very much to understand how they think is different from you, and even gradient differences among them. But this was a piece that could have been, Presbilla could have spared herself all of this just by having a couple of Christian or Jewish or Muslim friends who were traditionalists, right? Who believed what people like Robbie George believe, right? And could have said, "Oh, okay, I get it. I see the difference." But this is, as I call it, bubble trouble.
Chris, that brings us to our style section. And first up, we have definitely a TLDR Washington Post opinion essay. Women Are Divorcing and Finally Finding Happiness by Liz Lenz. And I think what she really means is I divorced and finally found happiness.
Yes.
Because it is a long essay in which she upbraids her husband for not being her ex-husband for not being sufficiently supportive of her career and for refusing to help on the home front, and broadens that to say, this is how men are.
This is how men are, and divorce is good.
And that basically it's impossible for women to be the breadwinner in their families because then they have to do it all, and men refuse to pitch in on the home front, more than 50-50, even if women are doing 50-50 of the earning. And essentially that conservatives say that marriage is a solution to way too many problems. And my favorite passage from this piece was, keep in mind that even if people marry, it is hard to stay married when, for instance, the state is more likely to incarcerate Black women and Black men, and social services are more likely to get involved in their children's lives. Today, nearly half of all Black women have never married. That's compared with roughly 30% of all women. The state is just more likely, like you're sitting at home, you're a Black woman, you're sitting at home with your husband, and the state just comes in and incarcerates them.
Yes, lacking in context, to be sure. It would be interesting to talk about the ways in which the criminal...
There is literally not a "to be sure" sentence in this essay.
She made it all the way through this without one time saying, no. And the I one time walked into a colleague's office, and the colleague had a copy of People magazine. I believe it was People or Us or something. And on the cover was Drew Barrymore, who was just thrilled with her divorce. And I read the article, and it said that Drew Barrymore was divorced and loving it. Love her divorce. Well, do you know why divorce is so great for Drew Barrymore? Because she's rich and she divorced a billionaire, and her kids, her great-grandchildren will be rich, and she has a staff and she has people, and getting a divorce, I do not mean to in any way belittle the travails of Drew Barrymore and her kids and any of that stuff, but suggesting advertising on the front page, I'm divorced. Divorce is hard, and it can be extraordinarily wrenching. And the idea that it's just like divorced and loving it. Yeah, if you're Hollywood royalty divorcing a billionaire and you can go, you can take 6 months off and go recoup at your house in the Turks and Caicos or whatever, cool. But for this is not to get too AEI in this episode, but this is something that a lot of my AEI colleagues write about and talk about, which is the marriage benefit, right? This is some Brad Wilcox writes a lot of the poverty scholarship goes around. Intact families are an enormous benefit for people who want to climb the success ladder, right? This piece is divorce is a luxury good, right? And I get it and I understand, but your TLDR is right, which is maybe divorce was really good for this woman. Maybe it was the best choice, and sometimes it's the only choice, and it's complicated and hard, but extrapolating out of that into other people's lives is meh.
I did think that this would be interesting to talk about, and I was about to say this is particularly interesting because you're divorced and could speak perhaps to some of the upsides of divorce. Sure, it's good for some people, and I'm somebody who makes more than 50% of the income in my household, and it can work. It is not actually, as this woman writes, which it may be good for some people, but it is not, as all men are not actually, as this woman writes, and divorce has upsides and downsides for people. It is contingent.
And I would never suggest that my experience in my life, nor would you suggest that your experience in your life is a template for other people, right? Like, this is what I discovered, so it must be true for you. That's not what we're supposed to be doing here.
All right.
Oh,
More fun, Chris, was the Wall Street Journal poll, men's style, what's sexy, what's not. Our poll results may surprise you. There was one surprise for me in here, okay?
Okay, what's
this
the
poll
surprise?
found, although 44% of the people interviewed find clean-shaven faces sexiest, a whopping 56% prefer some sort of whiskers, with 3 different hairy categories splintering that vote. Okay, agree. I'm with them on that.
Your beard, you're pro beard?
I am pro stubble.
Not for me.
Or beard. I'm into it.
Not for me. I could, if I wanted to, attack the survey work here and the representation of that survey work, which is shoddy. But I will simply say this in general. Gentlemen, don't ever, ever, ever make sexiness. Don't even allow yourself to think of the word sexy when you are choosing what you are going to wear. That is not your ambition. That is not your target. Your target is, and the other thing is, everything is different for somebody else. There's a passage in here that talks about it's sexy to wear a t-shirt and jeans a la James Dean. Well, let me tell you, if I wore a t-shirt and jeans a la James Dean, I would look like I was on work release from a local penitentiary picking up garbage on the side of the road. I would look like Sling Blade if I was rolling around in a t-shirt and jeans. David Beckham,
my husband rocks that.
David Beckham, on the other hand,
yeah,
can wear a t-shirt and jeans and be very sexy. that does not have anything to do with the t-shirt and jeans. It has to do with David Beckham versus Chris Steyerwalt. Well, you can speak to this. I don't think what women find attractive in men has a great deal to do with the clothes we wear.
I agree with that, though. Yeah, I agree with that. The thing I didn't understand here, only 22% of interviewees think men over 50 look sexy in sneakers.
Correct.
I mean, I think sneakers are fine.
Correct. No. They're fine for exercising. They're fine for doing athletic things.
I think they're fine.
You and I, of course, differ on the question of the concept of a dress sneaker, of the formal sneaker.
I'm not saying wear them to the Oval Office, which I've seen people do. We talked about a whole article about this. Not in the Oval Office, but cool pair of sneakers with jeans. That's cool. I'm into that.
Get adult shoes, men. Purchase adult shoes, please.
And then I think we can all agree men's jewelry was deemed relatively unsexy by 47% of those surveyed.
I'm a no on I'm a no on jewelry, but again, this goes to the previous point. Some guys, yes, right? If you're a Greek shipping magnate and you're rolling around with a billowy shirt on the deck of your yacht, throw a medallion on. Treat yourself. Go for it. And there are, like, I guess I would say this. I was denouncing fad over and fashion over the classics, but being a man means you have to develop your own sense of style, right? What do you like? What looks good on you? What are you comfortable wearing? And it's going to be different for everybody. So I know I have friends who are really well dressed and really well turned out, and they wear jewelry. They wear bracelets. Can you imagine bracelets?
Not into it.
But if for them it works. For me, I would look I would look like I was the pit boss at an Atlantic City casino. I would look horrible if I rocked jewelry, just as it might be wrong for them to wear suspenders and a bow tie. You avoid fashion, avoid fad, find what your style is, rooted in some tradition, and you'll build it out over time.
Chris, I think we should do some fashion experimentation on the Sunday show.
Okay.
And then have Wretches listeners, you guys tune into the Sunday show.
Okay.
And write us with feedback on
what we wore.
Chris's attire.
No, yours too.
Mine too. Fine.
We need a listener, so you can email us. Where do they email us? At Wretches.
Wretches at nebulouspodcasts.com.
And give us the
at nebulouspodcasts.com.
Give us the fit. It was the fit for Eliana and Chris. Okay, I like that.
Definitely. Chris, that brings us to our obsessions of the week, where we break down the stories we can't get out of our heads. And mine is a bit in the follow-up files category, where we learn in the New York Post that, remember we talked about, my obsession 2 weeks ago was an article in the Wrap about CNN star salaries getting slashed. And my follow-up is we now learn that the new CNN president, Mark Thompson, has informed staffers in a company-wide missive that they should expect to get 75% of their targeted bonuses, which are a percentage of their salary. And that amount came down from the 90% range of bonuses a year earlier under CEO Chris Licht. The tone of the email was that it was a year of stabilization, said an insider. It basically said we did really well to launch new shows and to stabilize the ship, but we ran into some of the same headwinds as other media companies. The source added that in previous years under Licht's predecessor, Jeff Zucker, bonuses could exceed 100% of the target. And this happens as CNN reportedly paid out in excess of $20 million to Don Lemon. And so inside CNN, folks were steaming that their bonuses were cut as Don Lemon was paid tens of millions of dollars. But this seems, I would not be surprised to see that percentage of targeted bonus, or either the targets themselves will go down or the percent of target will decrease.
Hardest hit by the original, the publication of the original article, where all of CNN's competitors, all of whose on-air talent looked at the numbers that people at CNN were getting and said, what? What?
Exactly.
Okay, so my obsession is a very sad obsession. It's a sad story, and it's very sad coverage. It's in the New York Times. It's a piece by Penelope Green, and headline, Shafika Hudson, who fought trolls on social media, dies at 46. When the hashtag End Father's Day began trending on Twitter, she realized it was more than a joke. It was a coordinated disinformation effort. Shafika Hudson was looking for a job in early June 2014, toggling between Twitter and email, when she noticed an odd hashtag that was surging on the social media platform, hashtag End Father's Day. The posters claimed to be Black feminists, but they had dubious handles like Nene Can't Stop and Cis Hate and Latrine Watts. They declared they wanted to abolish Father's Day because they said it was a symbol of patriarchy and oppression. They didn't seem like real people, Ms. Hudson thought, but parodies of Black women spouting ridiculous propositions. As Ms. Hudson told Forbes magazine in 2018, anybody with half the sense God gave a cold bowl of oatmeal, I like that, could see that these weren't feminist statements. But the hashtag kept trending, roiling the Twitter community, and the conservative news media picked it up, citing it as an example of feminism gone off the rails and, quote, a neat illustration of the cultural trajectory of progressivism, as a senior writer at National Review tweeted at the time. Fox News devoted a segment on its Fox and Friends show to lampooning it. So Ms. Hudson set out to combat what she realized was a coordinated action by trolls. She created a hashtag of her own, Your Slip is Showing, a Southernism that seemed particularly useful about calling out people who think they are presenting themselves flawlessly. She began to aggregate the trollers' posts under the hashtag and encouraged others to do so and to block the fake accounts. Her Twitter community took up the mission. They included Black feminists and scholars who did some digging and discovered that the end of Father's Day was a hoax. Slate wrote in 2019, organized on 4chan, the dark community of web forums, peopled by right-wing hate groups. Twitter, Ms. Hudson and others said, was largely unresponsive. Nonetheless, their actions were effective. Hashtag End Father's Day was pretty much silenced within a few weeks, though fake accounts continued to pop up over the years. Yet, End Father's Day, as it turned out, was more than a joke. It was a well-structured disinformation action. There's the story. Here's the payoff. Ms. Hudson, a freelance writer who had worked in nonprofits, but who from 2014 on had dedicated herself to Twitter activism, died on February 15th at an extended stay hotel in Portland, Oregon. She was 46. Her brother, Sally Hudson, confirmed her death, but said he did not know the cause. She had Crohn's disease and respiratory ailments, he said. Her followers were told in her posts that she had long COVID and had recently been diagnosed with cancer, and that she had no money to pay for her care. Many pitched in to help. Her followers expressed frustration and anger that Ms. Hudson had never been paid by the tech companies whose platforms she policed, and she had not been properly credited by scholars and news organizations that cited Your Slip is Showing, and that she had not received the health care she needed. The world owed Fuqua more than it gave her, Mickey Kendall, a cultural critic and author of Hood Feminism, said by phone. So the heartbreaking part of this story is that the New York Times did not write a piece about a life lost, wasted, the time wasted in a short life. You have this very brief life on Earth, and hers ended at just 46 years old. And she devoted the central part of it, it seems, to being on Twitter and arguing with trolls on Twitter. It's a stunningly tragic story, right? It is a cautionary tale for our time and for the age of social media. A person who lost themselves in social media. But instead, it is cast as a story of the injustice against this woman who was not paid for and rewarded by social media companies and the world for losing herself in battles with trolls. It depressed me so deeply because the story itself is sad, but also because even in death, right? Even in death, the New York Times still has the telescope turned around and doesn't say what a sad story of a person who lost themselves to social media, and instead says how the injustice of this, that this brave, wise woman who went to argue with creeps and dummies on Twitter was not better lionized for her work.
Chris, that brings us to reader mail. my favorite time of the week.
All right. Cheer me
We
up.
have a note from Catherine in Waxahachie. Thank you, Catherine, for putting the pronunciation of your city.
Catherine,
into the
I
email.
knew. I would have known.
Waxahachie, Texas. Please comment on this article, which suggests findings based on an electronic berry picking game. My favorite paragraph mentions the study's several limitations, which seem pretty severe, but don't seem to have limited the amount of insight the study purportedly offered.
This is great.
According
The
to
headline on the article, just to interrupt very briefly, the headline on the article in the Washington Post, author Leo Sands, ADHD-like traits could offer humans an advantage in foraging, study suggests.
And it notes, according to the study in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, people with ADHD-like traits are less likely to dwell among depleting food resources and more likely to explore other options instead, which can give them a foraging advantage in some environments. Using an online berry picking game informed by algorithms derived from optimal foraging theory. Are you familiar with optimal foraging theory?
Familiar with it. I live it.
Yeah.
live it.
Researchers from the University of Pennsylvania analyzed the decisions of 457 participants who were told to collect as many berries as possible under time pressure. Players chose between continuing to harvest from the same bushes, depleting them of berries and decreasing their yields, and traveling to different bushes, which were more abundant in fruit but cost players precious time. After the game, the participants completed an online screening assessment on ADHD symptoms developed by the World Health Organization. Those who self-reported ADHD-like symptoms moved between patches more frequently and collected more berries overall, the researchers found. What do you think? How overdiagnosed do you think ADHD is when people are diagnosing themselves?
Well, they're self-diagnosing, and thank goodness for Caveman ADHD. We really we owe a great debt to Caveman ADHD. This is great. We thank you to the University of Pennsylvania for putting in the work. They're putting it in.
Chris, that brings us to our favorite items of the week, where I am forced to say something nice, but you, as always, will lead us by example.
Oh, this is such a good and useful piece. And it goes to the point that you were mentioning before about the Arab world and Hamas. When the Atlantic does it well, they do it so well. Headline, the Houthis are very, very pleased. Since staking claim to the Palestinian cause, the Yemeni militants have come to seem unstoppable. It's by Robert Worth. And this piece, and I know that this is my fault, not the media's fault. I had not been able to really get my brain around what was going on in Yemen and why and what the larger dynamics were. And in one very well-researched, very well-written, engaging, engrossing piece, Worth gives me, I'm in, right? Like I finally understand it. It's a fascinating picture of what's going on politically, domestically, and around the region and the world with the Houthis. And it's such a good piece, and it's what the Atlantic is really good at, and I'm really grateful for it.
Chris, my favorite item was an essay in the New York Times by Babe Paley's granddaughter.
Oh, cool.
Belle Burden. And the background to this is that I have been riveted by the FX series Truman Capote versus the Swans.
Okay.
Which is fantastic. It is a drama about Truman Capote's Esquire essay written at the end of his life that called La Côte Basque, published in Esquire in 1975. And it's based on Larry Lemur's 2021 book, Capote's Women.
Okay.
And I have gone way down the rabbit hole on this because, and this essay hits on this, I watched this and the show is fantastic. I highly recommend it. Essentially Truman Capote befriended all of these wealthy New York society women whose husbands were titans of industry, and then he betrayed them.
Yes.
In this essay. And I just assumed that all of these women were much, much more interesting than they're portrayed in the show. And when you start reading about them, they were incredibly smart and fascinating and came from fascinating families. And it's super, super interesting. Tons of information out there. And that's what this essay gets to. And so Babe Paley, who's really the main female character in the show, who was married to the founder of CBS, William Paley. So her granddaughter writes in the Times, "My grandmother was far more complex than that. She was brilliant. She was funny. She was rarely at rest. She read constantly. She could lead a conversation on any topic. She was an artist, drawing in pencil and sculpting in clay, skills she kept hidden from most of the world. She was tall, 5'9", and her entry into any room was regal, commanding. She had a steely strength, not a weepy one, and a warm and playful charisma. Her famous style was born from those things, intelligence and artistry. The creators of Feud have made an entertaining and stylish show, but to my knowledge, no one in my family, not even my mother, was consulted by the creators, writers, directors, or cast members to lend color or truth to Babe's portrait, to her strengths and struggles, her complexities and contradictions. Had they asked us, and a different portrait of my grandmother, faithful to her, multidimensional, had been drawn, the whole of the story would have had more shape, more tension, more depth. What I wish more than anything is that my grandmother had lived long enough and been bold enough to tell her own story, claiming it before anyone had the chance to steal it from her."
Beautiful. Good for her. Good for writing it. And I'm so glad I haven't watched the show.
It is fantastic, and I recommend that. And then I listened to an interview with Larry Lemur. I can't remember. I'll have to try to dig up the interview I listened to, but that was wonderful too. And that is all the time we have for the news about the news. If you have a story you want us to talk about, email us at wretches@nebulouspodcasts.com and sign up for our newsletter at nebulouspodcasts.com. This has been Ink-Stained Wretches from Nebulous Media, produced by Colin Chicola. Find us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Wretches.